There are moments in life when a relationship begins to feel heavy, confusing, or strangely draining. You may pray for clarity, yet instead of answers you receive distance. Silence replaces connection. Tension replaces ease. And deep within, a quiet discomfort begins to grow. This is not random. Often what we call loss is actually a form of guidance. When someone is meant to leave your life, the first sign is inner disturbance. You feel unsettled around them, even when nothing is outwardly wrong. Your intuition sends subtle warnings: fatigue after conversations, restlessness in their presence, or a sense that you are shrinking to maintain harmony. The soul reacts long before the mind understands. The second sign is repeated conflict without resolution. Arguments circle endlessly, never transforming, never healing. This is not because one of you is evil, but because the relationship no longer serves growth. When patterns refuse to evolve, separation becomes the only teacher left. Third, your values begin to diverge. What once felt aligned now feels foreign. You may notice that being true to yourself requires disappointing them. This creates guilt, but guilt is often the price of becoming whole. Growth always threatens attachments rooted in an older version of you. The fourth sign is emotional exhaustion. You give more than you receive, explain yourself endlessly, or feel responsible for their happiness. Over time, resentment builds. This exhaustion is the psyche's way of saying, this bond is consuming energy meant for your individuation. Fifth, obstacles arise that keep pulling you apart: missed calls, cancelled plans, sudden distance. These are not coincidences. Life itself rearranges circumstances when conscious choice refuses to act. The sixth sign is projection. You begin to see in them traits you secretly reject or deny within yourself: control, dependence, fear, or aggression. The relationship becomes a mirror reflecting unresolved inner conflict. Once the lesson is learned, the mirror is no longer needed. Seventh, you feel called inward. Solitude becomes necessary. You crave silence, self-reflection, and independence. This inward pull signals that an outer attachment is interfering with inner integration. Finally, the eighth sign is peace at the thought of letting go. Even if it hurts, imagining life without them brings relief. That relief is not cruelty, it is truth. When peace follows loss, the soul recognizes alignment. God does not always remove people through dramatic endings. Sometimes he loosens the emotional thread until it quietly slips from your hands. What leaves was never meant to stay forever, and what stays must evolve with you or release you. Inner discomfort is often the earliest and most honest signal that something within us has shifted, long before logic can explain why. It appears quietly, almost innocently, as a sense of unease that has no clear cause. You may feel tense in the presence of someone you once trusted, or strangely tired after conversations that used to energize you. Nothing obvious has changed on the surface, yet something deep inside begins to resist. This discomfort is not weakness nor confusion. It is perception operating beneath conscious thought. The soul communicates in sensations, not sentences. While the mind demands evidence, explanations, and certainty, the soul responds to alignment. When a relationship no longer resonates with your inner truth, the body reacts first. Your breathing changes, your shoulders tighten, your thoughts become restless. These reactions are not accidental. They are the psyche's way of alerting you that an inner boundary is being crossed, even if you cannot yet name it. Often, we ignore this discomfort because it does not fit our narrative. The person may be kind, familiar, or important to our identity. Letting go feels illogical or even disloyal. So the mind steps in to override the feeling, offering justifications and rationalizations. You tell yourself you are overthinking, being dramatic, or ungrateful. But the discomfort persists, growing stronger each time it is dismissed. What is ignored does not disappear, it deepens. This inner tension arises because part of you is evolving while another part remains attached to the past. The relationship becomes a meeting place of two timelines: who you were and who you are becoming. The soul senses the incompatibility immediately, but the mind lags behind, clinging to memory, obligation, and fear of loss. Discomfort lives in that gap, demanding attention. Sometimes the unease feels like guilt, other times it feels like irritation, sadness, or numbness. You may find yourself withdrawing emotionally without intending to. Laughter feels forced, conversations feel repetitive. Even silence becomes heavy. These are not signs of coldness, they are signs of inner honesty. The soul refuses to fully participate in what no longer reflects its truth. This discomfort also carries wisdom about self-betrayal. It appears most strongly when you suppress your needs to preserve harmony. Each time you silence your intuition to keep someone close, the discomfort grows sharper. It is the inner self protesting against abandonment, your abandonment of yourself. The pain is not caused by the other person alone, but by the fracture between your inner knowing and outer behavior. Eventually, the mind begins to catch up. Patterns become visible. You notice how often you feel drained, defensive, or small. What once felt confusing now feels obvious. But the discomfort was there from the beginning, patiently waiting to be acknowledged. It did not come to destroy the relationship. It came to reveal truth. Whether that truth leads to transformation or separation depends on whether it is honored. Inner discomfort is not an enemy to overcome. It is a quiet form of guidance, urging alignment before damage is done. When listened to early, it protects the soul from prolonged suffering. When ignored, it turns into anxiety, resentment, and inner conflict. Long before the mind understands, the soul already knows. Repeating conflict is rarely about the surface issue being argued. The words may change, the circumstances may shift, but the emotional pattern remains stubbornly the same. This repetition is not accidental. It is a signal that something essential in the relationship has stopped evolving. When conflict no longer leads to insight, repair, or deeper understanding, it becomes a closed loop, and closed loops are signs of stagnation. At first, conflict can be meaningful. Disagreement exposes differences, brings hidden expectations to light, and forces growth through tension. In healthy relationships, conflict transforms both people. Something is learned, a boundary is clarified, or a deeper respect emerges. But when the same argument returns again and again, unchanged in tone and outcome, transformation has already failed. The relationship is no longer learning from itself. Repeating conflict often indicates that both people are defending fixed inner positions. Instead of listening, each side waits to be understood. Instead of curiosity, there is certainty. The conflict becomes a ritual, almost predictable, because it serves an unconscious purpose, protecting identity. To change would require one or both individuals to question deeply held beliefs about themselves, their role, or their sense of control. When that feels too threatening, the psyche chooses repetition over growth. Over time, this repetition erodes emotional safety. You begin to anticipate conflict before it happens. Words are filtered, honesty is withheld, and emotional presence fades. Even moments of peace feel temporary, like a pause between storms. The nervous system stays on guard, preparing for the next familiar clash. What once felt like passion or intensity slowly turns into exhaustion. This kind of conflict also reveals a deeper misalignment of values or needs. One person may be seeking intimacy, while the other seeks autonomy. One desires emotional depth, the other avoids vulnerability. These differences are not inherently wrong, but when they cannot be integrated, conflict becomes the language of incompatibility. Each argument is an attempt to force alignment where none naturally exists. As conflict repeats, it often loses emotional honesty. Resentment replaces expression. Past wounds are dragged into the present, not to heal them, but to justify distance. Apologies become mechanical or disappear entirely. Even resolution feels hollow, because nothing truly shifts beneath the surface. The relationship continues, but only in form, not in spirit. There is also a subtle grief within repeating conflict, the grief of unrealized potential. Both people may sense that something meaningful once existed or could have existed, but no longer does. The arguments are not just about disagreement, they are about loss. Each repeated fight confirms that the relationship cannot become what it once promised to be. Eventually, repeating conflict becomes a message. It says that the relationship has reached the limits of its capacity to transform. This does not mean either person has failed. It means the dynamic has completed its psychological purpose. When conflict no longer opens doors, it closes them. And in that closure, there is an invitation not to fight harder, but to recognize that growth sometimes requires separation rather than persistence. Diverging values are often misunderstood as betrayal, incompatibility, or personal failure, yet in many cases they are signs of inner development. Values do not remain static throughout life, they evolve as consciousness expands. What once felt essential may later feel limiting, and what once felt distant may suddenly feel vital. When two people grow at different inner speeds or in different directions, their values naturally begin to separate. This separation is not a collapse of meaning, but a reorganization of it. In the early stages of a relationship, shared values often arise from shared wounds, shared ambitions, or shared survival strategies. People bond over what helps them feel safe, accepted, or validated at that stage of life. As long as both remain in similar inner terrain, the values appear aligned. But growth disrupts this symmetry. One person may begin seeking truth over comfort, depth over approval, or authenticity over belonging. When this happens, old agreements start to feel constricting rather than supportive. The pain of diverging values comes from attachment to sameness. We expect loyalty to mean consistency and change to mean rejection. When someone evolves, it can feel as though they are abandoning not just a belief, but the relationship itself. Guilt arises, followed by self-doubt. You may ask yourself whether you are becoming selfish, difficult, or ungrateful. Yet this inner conflict is often the friction between who you were required to be and who you are becoming. Spiritual growth frequently demands re-evaluation. You question inherited beliefs, unconscious habits, and emotional patterns that once went unchallenged. This questioning changes how you relate to power, intimacy, responsibility, and meaning. If the other person is not on a similar path of inquiry, the gap widens. Conversations become strained. What excites you no longer resonates with them. What they defend feels outdated to you. Neither position is wrong, but they are no longer synchronized. Diverging values also expose fear. Staying aligned sometimes requires self-betrayal, silencing insights, softening truths, or delaying growth to preserve harmony. The soul resists this compromise. It experiences alignment as vitality and misalignment as heaviness. When values diverge, the discomfort you feel is not proof of wrongdoing. It is evidence that inner integrity is demanding expression. There is often grief in this process, because shared values once provided connection, identity, and meaning. Letting go of them can feel like losing a language only the two of you spoke. But growth does not erase what was real. It recontextualizes it. What once united you may have served its purpose, helping both of you become who you needed to be at that time. When values diverge, the relationship is confronted with a choice: evolve together or honor difference through distance. Not all bonds are meant to survive transformation. Some exist to awaken you, not accompany you forever. Diverging values, then, are not a sign of moral decline or relational failure. They are evidence that inner life is moving forward, even when outer connections struggle to keep pace. Emotional exhaustion is rarely the result of a single event. It accumulates quietly through repeated inner compromise. It appears when giving becomes habitual and receiving becomes scarce, when presence is demanded but understanding is absent. At first, the fatigue is subtle. You feel tired after interactions, slightly numb, less motivated to engage. Over time, this tiredness deepens into a persistent depletion that no amount of rest seems to repair. This exhaustion is not weakness. It is a signal that an inner imbalance has taken root. At the core of emotional exhaustion is a misdistribution of psychic energy. One part of the self is constantly active, explaining, soothing, adapting, or rescuing, while another part is neglected. The self becomes one-sided. When energy flows outward without renewal inward, the psyche loses its equilibrium. Wholeness requires circulation, not sacrifice. Without reciprocity, even love becomes draining. This imbalance often begins with good intentions. You may believe that patience, loyalty, or selflessness will eventually restore harmony. But when effort is consistently one-directional, it erodes authenticity. You stop expressing needs because they feel inconvenient. You minimize discomfort to avoid conflict. In doing so, you fracture your inner unity. The outer relationship is preserved at the cost of inner coherence. Emotional exhaustion also reveals a deeper psychological conflict: the fear of separation versus the fear of self-loss. To avoid losing the relationship, you abandon parts of yourself: your anger, your limits, your desire for rest. These exiled parts do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, where they express themselves as fatigue, irritability, or numbness. The body carries what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. As exhaustion grows, resentment follows. You may feel unappreciated or unseen, yet struggle to name why. The resentment is not directed only at the other person, but at yourself for tolerating the imbalance. This inner accusation intensifies the fatigue. The psyche becomes a battleground between duty and truth, endurance and authenticity. Wholeness cannot emerge in such conditions. Inner integration requires that all parts of the self are given voice and value. When exhaustion dominates, certain aspects of you are overdeveloped while others are starved. Caretaking replaces creativity. Survival replaces curiosity. You function, but you no longer feel alive. This is the cost of prolonged imbalance. There is also a spiritual dimension to emotional exhaustion. When a relationship demands constant self-erasure, it interferes with your deeper calling to become whole. Growth requires energy for reflection, solitude, and transformation. Exhaustion robs you of this energy, trapping you in maintenance rather than evolution. Emotional exhaustion is not a moral failure or a lack of love. It is the psyche's last defense against fragmentation. It signals that something must change, not through greater effort, but through restored balance. When energy is allowed to flow both outward and inward, when boundaries replace overextension, the possibility of inner wholeness returns. Until then, exhaustion remains, not as punishment, but as a necessary warning that the self can no longer afford to be divided. Projection occurs when aspects of our inner life that remain unacknowledged are unconsciously placed onto another person. What we admire intensely, resent deeply, or react to emotionally in others often has roots within ourselves. Relationships become the stage on which these hidden parts are revealed. We believe we are responding to the other person, but in truth we are encountering fragments of our own psyche reflected back at us. This process begins because the mind resists owning certain qualities. Traits that feel unacceptable, threatening, or incompatible with our self-image are pushed out of awareness. Yet nothing that belongs to the psyche ever truly disappears. These disowned elements seek expression, and they find it through others. A partner may seem controlling, weak, selfish, or idealized beyond reason, not because they fully embody these traits, but because they carry the projection of what we have not integrated. Strong emotional reactions are the clearest indicator of projection. When a behavior provokes anger that feels disproportionate, or admiration that feels obsessive, something deeper is at work. The intensity does not arise from the situation alone, but from the collision between consciousness and the unconscious. The other person becomes a carrier of meaning that exceeds who they actually are. Projection is not limited to negative qualities. We also project strength, wisdom, purity, or salvation onto others. In doing so, we surrender our own potential. We believe the other holds what we lack, forgetting that the source of what we seek already exists within us in undeveloped form. The relationship then becomes unequal, charged with dependency or idealization, and burdened with unrealistic expectations. Over time, projection distorts intimacy. You no longer see the person as they are, but as the screen upon which your inner conflicts are displayed. Communication suffers because you are responding to an image rather than a reality. Misunderstandings multiply, and disappointment becomes inevitable. When the projection collapses, it often feels like betrayal, though nothing truly changed except perception. The purpose of projection is not deception, but revelation. It points directly to what remains unresolved. The traits you cannot tolerate in others often indicate what you have denied in yourself. The qualities you long for in them often reveal what you have not yet claimed. Relationships then function as psychological mirrors. They expose the unfinished business of the soul. This mirroring can feel painful because it threatens identity. To withdraw a projection requires humility and responsibility. It means admitting that what you criticized or idealized outside belongs, in some form, inside. This moment is often mistaken for the failure of the relationship, when it is actually an opportunity for inner integration. When projection is recognized, the relationship changes. Emotional charge diminishes. Clarity replaces compulsion. You regain energy that was previously bound to unconscious expectation. Whether the relationship continues or ends becomes secondary to the deeper work taking place within. Projection reveals that relationships are not merely connections between two people, but encounters between conscious and unconscious material. They bring to the surface what must be faced to become whole. The mirror exists not to trap us, but to show us what is waiting to be integrated, accepted, and transformed within ourselves. Peace after letting go often arrives quietly, almost unnoticed at first. There is no dramatic relief, no sudden joy, but a gentle spaciousness where tension once lived. You may expect grief, regret, or emptiness, yet instead you feel lighter, calmer, more present in your own body. This peace can be confusing, even frightening, because it contradicts what the mind believes loss should feel like. But this calm is not indifference, it is alignment. Letting go disrupts attachment, and attachment thrives on fear. Fear of being alone, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of regret. When a bond ends, the mind anticipates punishment for breaking familiarity. Yet when peace follows, it reveals that the attachment was sustained more by habit than by truth. The soul recognizes freedom before the ego understands it. This peace does not deny the reality of love or shared history. It coexists with sadness, memory, and even longing. But unlike grief that feels chaotic and destabilizing, this peace feels grounded. You are not torn apart internally. There is no constant inner argument about what you should have done differently. The inner noise softens. This silence is meaningful. It suggests that an internal conflict has resolved. Often peace emerges because self-betrayal has ended. While the relationship existed, you may have suppressed needs, intuition, or truth to preserve connection. Letting go restores inner honesty. When inner division ends, peace naturally follows. The relief you feel is not from escaping responsibility, but from returning to integrity. Divine alignment is rarely dramatic. It does not always feel like triumph or certainty. More often it feels like simplicity. Decisions no longer require justification. You stop rehearsing explanations. The future feels open rather than threatening. This openness is not emptiness, it is potential. Peace after letting go also signals trust. Trust that what left was not meant to accompany you further. Trust that growth sometimes requires subtraction. When something no longer belongs, holding on to it creates friction within the soul. Releasing it restores harmony. This harmony feels peaceful because it reflects alignment with a deeper order beyond personal desire. The mind may still question the choice. Doubt can surface unexpectedly, but doubt lacks emotional urgency now. It passes without consuming you. This is another sign that the decision was rooted in something deeper than impulse. What remains steady when doubt arises is peace, and peace does not argue. Loss fragments when attachment is severed prematurely or unconsciously. But when letting go emerges from inner clarity, it integrates rather than fractures. You feel more whole, not less. Energy returns. Creativity stirs. You sense movement where there was stagnation. These are not coincidences, they are responses to restored alignment. Peace after letting go is not the absence of pain, but the absence of inner resistance. It is the soul recognizing that what has ended has completed its purpose. What remains is not a void, but a clearing. And in that clearing, life can unfold without force, without fear, and without the weight of holding on to what no longer belongs.